Well, this is a viewer request video for assistance setting up a glider mix or multiple mixes. Relatively new user to EdgeTX and the TX16S, and was pretty close. Had all the right elements in his setup. Sent me a couple of different sample models that he'd been working on, and there was a number of mistakes in there, and I just decided to start fresh and build him a new one to use as a kind of a baseline to then build from there. And so the purpose of this video is this person's had the new model for a few days now and has had some time to play with it and has already kind of started refining it. But two purposes of this video: I wanted to share a little more in-depth detail of what I did and how I set it up in the background, in case anything's not perfectly clear, so that they know what I did, and also to share with you guys in case anybody's trying to do this. Now, I will preface this with that I am not a glider flyer. I don't know how to do soaring or any of that. I've never done that type of flying. So what I've built here is based on what the viewer was asking for and what they were trying to set up. So I just kind of went with what they had built, but cleaned it up and got rid of a few bugs that were in the program and just followed some better techniques. I'll jump in to show what I built. And then the second part of this video is going to be actually configuring the model to my actual desktop model to show you how I would set up the control surfaces, if I needed to reverse anything, how I would dial that into the actual model. Now the model, the viewer's model is going to be obviously different because this is my test model that I've used in a number of other videos, so the control surfaces are not going to go the same directions. You can't use this, directly translate to any other model. But I just want to show you the mechanics of it. Okay, so as you'll see on the channel monitor, if I move here, I'm moving the aileron stick. There's a mix, basically full, in one position I got full ailerons. I'm moving the ailerons and the flaps, so I get a full span aileron. If I switch it into another mode, I turn that off, but I do have a aileron to rudder mix for coordinated turns, or I can go to what was called an aerobatic mode with the D switch. Then I get both. I just get the full span aileron, but no rudder to aileron mix. Now let me jump into if I go through the flight modes. If I hit, I'm in flight mode 1. Now I got P1. Let me show you that real quick. So now I do have the number 1 selected, and I'm in the normal mode. So I rearranged the flight modes a little bit. Now if I go to flight mode 2, which is the speed mode, it basically raises the flaps a little bit. This is what was requested. I understand that makes the plane potentially go faster. And then mode 3 is if you're in a thermal, it will lower the flaps a little bit. And I don't have these trimmed out right, it's just for an example. And then flight mode 4 is the landing mode. It lowers the flaps all the way down, but it also compensates the elevator, and I've got some crow built into here that you can adjust. So it's making the ailerons go up and the flaps go down. If I move the aileron, you can see I still have control over those. So that's the crow feature that's an option when you're in the flap or the landing flight mode. Now the way I've done the trims is the aileron and rudder and throttle trims are all carryover between all 4 flight modes. The elevator has a separate trim for each of the flight modes to compensate for the different flap positions. So if I move T2, let me back up a little bit here. So if I move T2 to adjust my elevator trim, so I'm in flight mode 0, which is the normal mode, and I'll adjust the elevator trim. Now if I jump over to flight mode 2, you'll see that changes, and then I'll adjust that one. If I go back to flight mode 1, so that elevator compensation is per flight mode. The aileron and rudder, they stay the same because those generally don't change. You don't need the compensation to get rid of ballooning or diving. And then of course landing with a lot of flaps is going to need a lot more elevator compensation. And I've got that crow in there too. Okay, so that's the elevator trim, and then the other trims just carry over. And that's just standard trim. Now when you're in landing mode, let me show you this. If I move If I move T6, that's my crow adjustment, and it will operate in flight mode 0 or 3, which we'll call this, even though this is actually FM 0, I'm going to call this 1. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. In reality, it goes FM 0, 1, 2, and 3, but just for simplicity, I'm just going to call this flight mode 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the fourth flight mode, which is the landing, if you're in landing mode or the normal mode, and you move T6, it is going to adjust that crow global variable, and I'll show you that in a bit, but it only does anything if you're in the landing mode. So since right now I'm in landing mode, so you can see I've got some crow on the ailerons. If I change that, I've also got a pop-up. I'm adjusting global variable 2 for crow, and every time I tap the button it goes by 1%. I don't know which way is up or down. You'd have to reverse that, as you set up the plane. We'll do that in the second part of this video. But anyway, so that adjusts your crow, but it only does anything if you're in the landing flight mode. So if I just leave that, there's my crow up, theoretically, and I still got aileron movement. If I go back to normal mode, that crow goes away. Now those channel 2 and 5 are just ailerons. But I do have that full span, but only a partial mix for the flaps. So you can change that, and I'll show you that in a minute. Now the other thing is adjusting or tuning the flaps in each position. So in normal mode, you don't want any flaps. If I go to speed mode, which is flight mode 2, T5 right here adjusts the flap position in each of those flight modes. So if I adjust that up or down, so let's say I'm in speed mode, I want to go up a little bit more or down a little bit more. See, that global variable 1 is the flap position. We can adjust that with the T5, and I'll show you how I'm doing that a little bit later. As I go, now I'll go to thermal mode, and that's got a different position for the flaps. You can adjust that and fine tune it. So you want to tune each of the flight modes for the flap position. I want to go to landing position, same thing. They're going to go way down. I got them set at about 90%. But, I can set those wherever I need them for that. So T5 and T6. T5 is your flap adjustment or mix, whatever you want to call it. And then T6 is your how much crow you want. Now if I switch over to normal mode and I move T6, you will see it doing some, moving the value, but it doesn't do anything because I'm not using that flight mode 0 global variable 2 in anything. So I think that's most of the functionality. Let me jump into the screens and show you. So let me jump into the model. Scroll over to the flight modes. So you can see where I've established FM 0 as the normal mode because that is the default. So when I've got 6P1 selected, as of right now, I'm on that mode. If I go to 6P5 or 6, which I'll do right now, there's 6P5 I'm selected, 6P6, it stays on flight mode 0, which I have configured. That way we don't accidentally get into a flight mode that hasn't been configured. Now let me jump into that real quick. So I'm just calling it normal. I do have a 2-second fade in and fade out just for smooth transitions. Because some of these, like especially landing, if you go from landing to normal, you're moving the flaps by a lot, and you don't want that throwing off the aircraft. Trims are just set to flight mode 0. If I go down to the bottom, you can see I've deactivated trims for T5 and T6 because I'm using those elsewhere. I'm doing a special function with an increment or decrement for that. Okay, let me back up, go to speed mode. This one I have selected the 6P2 switch to select it. Also got a 2-second fade in, and you can see over here all the trims are from flight mode 0 except for elevator because I want unique trims for elevator. I covered this in another video where you can do flight modes for your elevator to flap compensation. I'm just taking that same thing and put it in this with the rest of it. And then same thing on T5 and T6. Those are deactivated in all these flight modes. Okay, you jump over to the thermal mode. Pretty much the same thing except for I'm using flight mode 2 for the elevator. Everything else is the same. And then the landing mode, a longer fade in and fade out because of the extreme transition of the flaps. And then same thing, elevator trim is using flight mode 3. That way each of these flight modes has their own elevator trim. T5 and T6 disabled. And I didn't do anything for flight modes 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 because they're not being used. Okay, jump over. The inputs are much simpler in this setup. I've got the same 3 high-low medium rates that were over there with the 30% expo. So if I flip the C switch or SC switch, I can go between the 3 rates, and throttle and rudder are assigned. Let me jump over the mixes. Okay, so throttle's nothing there, just assigning a channel. So your mixes is where you're actually sending the output to the receiver. The inputs, doesn't matter what order those are in. And then channel 2, that's your first aileron or aileron right, I've named it. And then for that crow mix, it only goes into the crow mix when you're in the 6P4 button is pressed, which you're in landing mode. Let me jump in here real quick. There's really nothing to see here. It's just aileron right using the aileron input. You may or may not have to reverse the weights and stuff for that. Don't necessarily need all these other flight modes. You just really need to make sure that you have those selected, because those are the only ones we're using. And I'm not using any of the slow up or slow down on this one, because you don't want to conflict with the other things. Okay, now the crow mix, this is a little unique. It's called the crow right because it's for the right aileron. Just got the source set for max, and then the weight, I'm using global variable 2 for the weight. That way when I adjust T6 to change the global variable 2, it uses that value for the weight. And then the switch is the 6P switch 6 position, so I'll make sure it doesn't activate unless I'm in landing mode. That's it for that. Nothing in here. I do have this one doing slow down, just because when you transition out of crow mode without the slow down, it's going to make a rapid jump. It ignores the fade on that one because the fade is doing a separate thing. Fade's not controlling from the flight mode, it's not controlling that crow, it just immediately shuts it off. So you don't need to slow up because that's using the fade in part of that. Now if you needed to reverse a crow, all you got to do is scroll to this weight here and then push the button there, and you can just invert just the crow. So if, let's say all your ailerons, everything works, but the crow's backwards, you would just invert that here, and that would change that to minus. That's how you would invert that if you needed to. We may have to do that when we do the model setup. Okay, jump out of that. Elevator, nothing special there. Just a very standard. No weights or anything. You can see it's offset right now, just because I've got I was messing with the trims, but I'm in flight mode 0. Just so you see it, there's nothing in here. I don't have any slow up or slow down. Okay, now channel 4 does have a rudder to aileron mix built in there on the D switch. Basically, if the D is not towards me, I'm going to have a rudder to aileron mix. The viewer wanted a kind of an aerobatic mode to get rid of that coordinated turn thing in case you want to do aileron rolls and such. So towards me, that was off. If I go in the middle position or forward, both of those have the rudder to aileron mix activated. Let me jump into there to show you what's in there. But and the exclamation point in front of the SD means it's not in that position. So any other position, it'll be active. And nothing special in here. Okay. And then channel 5 is pretty much the same setup as channel 2 because it's the other aileron. And then channel 7 and 8, this one's a little more unique because these are the ones that have, we're adjusting that position based on flight mode. So if I jump into there, I've got this one set flap left for max, and I'm using the global variable 1, which is the flap, for that. And likewise, you can reverse it there if you need to. You can also do it in the output, but when you got multiple things, both that can control a control surfaces, you got to be careful where you reverse that channel. The output's the kind of the number one place you would go, but if you got more than one thing that can control that surface, and only one of them is incorrect, you don't want to change the output because then you'll fix one, but you'll mess up the other one. So on this one, I just have the 3 flight modes. You can do the same thing with all these because we're really only ever using those 4 flight modes. This one doesn't have any slows established. And then the this one here is the flat or the full span aileron mix. So when the SD switch is not forward, it's kind of the opposite of the aileron to rudder mix. If the switch is not forward, then I've got that aileron, full span aileron. And I've only got the weight set at 50%, just so when you get in that mode, you're only moving the flaps by 50% of the ailerons. You can put that to 100% if you wanted to move, but I did that as a default just because your flaps, other than in normal mode, your flaps are in some other non-zero position, so you'd want to just be cautious of how much weight you put in there for the full span aileron if you're going to use the flaps. If you really want to get complex with it, you could deactivate the full span ailerons if you were in like flat mode or one of the others, so it would only do aileron, full span ailerons in certain flight modes. I didn't set that up in this one, but you certainly could. Okay, now we'll jump over. Nothing, I don't have extended limits on. You can add that later if we need it. Curves, this was just a throttle experiment I was doing. The viewer has a throttle that doesn't start until it gets up a little higher than that, so we wanted to have it start more close to the bottom of the thing, so I was playing with some options on that. Global variables is where I'm doing the controls. So I've got global variable 1 is the flap, global variable 2 is the crow, and you can see I'm only using the crow because you can't turn it off in flight mode 0, so it's just active, but I'm just not using that value in any mix. In flight mode 3 is where I'm really using the crow, and that's where it's set for 29, and then that's where you saw in that mix where I'm using that value for the ailerons when I'm in the landing mode. So just using those two global variables, and they do change based on what flight mode you're in. So if I go to the landing mode, for example, flight mode 3, which is technically his 4, you got different values here for the flaps and for the crow in that flight mode. In the first take, I forgot to show this, but in the global variables page, we didn't go in and edit any of them, but let me show you what happens when you go in there and edit. So I'll tap it, I'll go to edit, and a couple things I did in here is I limited the minimum and maximum to -100 to +100. So when you're hitting the T5 and T6, you can't inadvertently go out of the range. If you end up doing extended limits, then you could change those if necessary. But the defaults are like 1024 and -1024, so you definitely don't want that. So change those limits. This is also where you turn on that little pop-up window so you can see on the screen what you're doing, and then you just enable whatever flight modes you want to use for these. So you'll notice here I got normal, you can't turn on and off. I've got it in flight mode 1, 2, and 3 are all enabled, and then those values you can change them manually here, but you can also change those with the T5 and T6 when you're doing that adjustment. And that's it for here. Let me show you the crow one. It's a little bit different. In the crow, we got the same min-max limits, but I've only enabled the landing mode, flight mode 3, and then of course the flight mode 0 you can't turn on and off, so that's just enabled. But so that's that. I just forgot to show you that on the first take, so I'm adding this in. Okay, so if I jump over to the logical switches, I've just set up my standard. This is kind of my standard throttle cut that I do for all my planes and what I've recommended. I've done videos on this, but it essentially, rather than just having a toggle switch to turn it on and off, you have to have both the, so here's my throttle. If I move the throttle forward, that one's not true, and then if I pull the throttle cut button, so now I've cut the throttle. If I put the throttle back on with the switch, so that turned on, but it's waiting for my throttle to go low before it turns on. That way you can't accidentally bump the throttle cut button and have the prop just start up. So if I lower the throttle, so I'm going to lower the throttle down once it gets below 98%.
Throttle active.
Turn on both of those, and then if I jump over to the special functions, here's where a lot of the stuff is happening. So special function 1 and 2 are my T5 up and down, and what I'm doing is I'm adjusting global variable 1 with that, with a +1 or a -1 depending on which direction I push that. Let me jump in there and show you how that's set up. The trigger is T5 plus, the function is adjust. I'm changing a global variable called flap, and then the mode is increment or decrement, and then down here in the increment or decrement window, you tell it whether you want it to go plus or minus for that, and then of course make sure. And you can change that 1 if you want that to move faster. You can change that to 2, 3, 4, whatever you want. Just know that you're going to lose some precision if you change that. You won't be able to put them in as precise of a position that you could. So just be aware of that. Back up one, and then SF2 is basically the same thing, except for I'm going by -1 with the T5 minus. Does the exact same thing, it just goes up or down. And then SF3 and 4 doing the same thing, but for T6, and it adjusts global variable 2. And then down here, special functions 5, 6, and 7 are related to my throttle cut. LO2 is the actual throttle cut bit or logical switch. So if LO2 is not on, it overrides channel 1 to -100, which is the throttle cut, and then it also plays the throttle cut track. And then if LO2 turns on, that is my throttle active, and that turns it on, and then that plays that track. That is pretty much it in the radio. I will jump over to the model and do hopefully a fairly quick setup of all the control surfaces, show you how I would configure it when I get it actually onto the model and get it bound.